Please join me in giving Brad Lips a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Thanks very much. But, very glad to be here in front of you and joining the Pachyderm Club today. As John described, I've been working now for 22 years for an organization called Atlas Network, which is based in, right outside of Washington, D.C., but we work globally. And we are a network of free market think tanks. We're the organization that I lead is a service organization that trains them up, finds funds for them, and connects them together so they can learn how to do work better. And all of my colleagues sort of self-identify as fiscal conservatives or libertarians, and I thought that I would start today by asking if you agree with this sort of provocative statement on the screen. I want to take a little temperature of the room so that the statement, if you can't see it in the back, reads, "Liberty is the most important value. I would support policies that protect liberty even if they produced inferior economic results because they'd still be morally right." So let's have a raise your hands. I go straight up on this one, but I don't know about the rest of you. Okay. It's a good mix. The great thing is that it should be celebrated with by those that have hands up, those who kept hands down, is that we actually don't have to choose. We don't have to choose between what's morally right in advancing individual liberty and what is economically beneficial for all of society, and in particular for low-income parts of our societies. The talk I'm going to give today is about a project that Atlas Network has been incubating for a few years that addresses global poverty while staying very much in line with our mission of promoting individual liberty. And for me, this gets really important when I'm in different sorts of rooms, because there were a good number of hands up people in this room, but when you go outside of these rooms, I tend to find that most of my old college friends, my old high school friends, they're not hands up guys. They are sort of, shrug guys. They don't think about liberty in the abstract as something that they should be caring about. They're not going to read the Milton Friedman books that made a big influence on me. But they're good people, and there's common ground to be shared with them. A reason that we can all be allies, because we both care for the poor, we both care about what's unfair, and there's an opportunity, as you'll see, for us to work together on behalf of the global poor that's quite different from the strategies that have been tried through recent decades. And this potential to really broaden the audience of people that would have an interest in the kind of work that Atlas Network's partners do. For me, it's kind of thrilling to think that not everybody has to pass a test about knowing their F.A. Hayek and their Milton Friedman in order to join with us in doing important work. That's what was really exciting when we launched this project called Poverty and Freedom about 3 years ago. I'm going to give you the background here because we saw this exciting opportunity because there were really like three big trends that seemed to be converging and creating an opportunity. The first was a growing understanding about the limits of old strategies for eliminating poverty. Has anybody seen the documentary Poverty, Inc.? Came out a few years ago. I think it may still be on Netflix or Amazon Prime. It's a fantastic expose of how so much of the economic development industry sort of feeds its own, but at the expense of local industry and local solutions inside the communities that they're ostensibly going to be looking at. You sort of realize how much corruption happens within foreign aid, how much dependency is created by these old strategies. The thing that has been impressive from where I sit, though, is that after watching that documentary that came out about 5 years ago and having it sort of confirm my suspicions about who I thought the enemy was, as I've learned more about the economic development community in recent years as we started this project, there's a lot of really important soul searching that's been going on among development economists who are wondering why it is that a lot of the strategies that have been bet on have not been working. And I think that where I land on this is that direct aid can be useful in an emergency, but it's not going to do anything to break these cycles of dependency, to break the cycles of poverty, because it really is the classic give a man a fish strategy that may work for a day, but it's not going to make a lasting difference. There's lots of organizations, lots of people that say, I know the other half of that proverb. Let's teach a man to fish. Let's do skills training. Let's encourage people to become entrepreneurs. But you know what? I have come to the thinking that this strategy has its limits also, and in fact is kind of patronizing. In fact, in poor countries, the problem is not a lack of know-how. It's not a lack of effort, a talent deficit. The problem is that people do not have economic rights. And with economic rights, people are going to do things that go far beyond consuming a fish, learning to fish and going out to fish every day. They're going to create fisheries and other productive enterprises that will feed communities far outside of their own family. They're going to be doing things that lift up the wealth level within their own societies. So with economic rights, those who are poor today, I believe, can find their own route out of poverty. And one of my favorite quotes comes from Lant Pritchett. He's a economist at Harvard, and he said in one podcast I was listening to, he said, "Mostly in the world there are not poor people, there are people in poor places." And when I think about what he means by this, I think about an Uber driver that I was chatting up a few weeks ago, a guy that grew up in Haiti, and when he was in Haiti, he was in poverty. But that wasn't his failure. He was in a society where it's almost impossible to get ahead, and when he made his way to the United States, where we have the rule of law, where it's easy to enter the job market, he was able to thrive. And this leads me to trend 2, which is that there's now growing evidence that poverty rates decline when you can achieve reforms that enable enterprise in countries that traditionally have been poor. I'm going to give you one more slide with a quote, which I think shows how the conventional wisdom has turned. This is Bono of U2, biggest rock star of my generation, certainly the celebrity who was the loudest in haranguing governments to increase their foreign aid. But in 2013, he started to change his tune. He gave a talk at Georgetown where he said this. He said, commerce and entrepreneurial capitalism take more people out of poverty than aid. Of course, we know that. I'm very happy that Bono knows that now, but he didn't know that before. We didn't always know that. There's really an emerging empirical body of work that shows that when you have more economic freedom, you have more wealth. And in fact, we went to a guy that founded a report called the Doing Business Report that's published annually at the World Bank. And we said to him, hey, you've been doing this for 20 years now. Is the data set rich enough that you can run the regressions and see how poverty rates move when you have increases in economic freedom as measured by this report called the Doing Business Report, which looks at how easy it is to start a business or run a business in a particular country. And indeed, the numbers that came back that were published in the 2018 edition showed that when you move up 5 percentage points in the economic freedom ranking that Doing Business does, you're going to see a 1%, it tends to be associated with a 1% decline in poverty rates. And what's exciting about this is that this isn't a one-time blip that's going to snap back. You're really changing the trajectory of societies when you're creating opportunities for people to be engaged in productive enterprise. But there is a problem. There's a catch to all this, because historically, people who have come in from Western countries and set the priorities about how other countries should change, it's not a great track record. There's been a lot of unintended consequences that have not been desirable, that have created a backlash, that have created reforms that don't stick, and people that take advantage of corrupt rules. So my colleague Matt Warner has called this the outsider's dilemma. It's one of the things that he discusses in this book called Poverty and Freedom. We have a few copies here. I'll encourage you to take what's left and let me know if you want me to send you one if we run out. But Matt puts forward a different way of thinking about what a global poverty solution should look like. And it's really pretty simple. It's based on, first, making sure that you let local knowledge lead. And you want that local knowledge to be aiming towards institutional reforms. And those are the ones that are going to have the scale that affect masses of people. And those institutional reforms should indeed be in the direction of economic freedom. Now, the third trend that was coming together that I think we were sort of in a unique perspective to observe was the increasing effectiveness of civil society organizations in poor countries that have been collaborating with Atlas Network for decades now. These are organizations that are committed to exactly this type of change, who have the local knowledge and the local credibility to make reforms stick. So my organization, Atlas Network, is the hub of a group of now more than 500 partners that are spread across 99 different countries. There's about 200 partners that are based in the US, but another 300 or so that are abroad. And it's the partners abroad that we began working with on this project we call Poverty and Freedom. Let me tell you how we designed this. This is a project that the John Templeton Foundation helped us with, and we went and reached out to our partner network, and we said, why don't you look at these third-party indices that measure economic freedom? The Fraser Institute and Cato do one, the Heritage Foundation and the Wall Street Journal do one, and then there's that Doing Business Index that's published by the World Bank. And we said, look at how your country scores and think about what kind of reforms would move your country up in those rankings. And then identify the reforms that you think are achievable within a 2 to 3 year window, and tell us how you're going to do it. And in that way, we're not the ones that are being prescriptive at all about telling people what to do. We're just sort of setting the marker out there, saying, economic freedom correlates with decreases in poverty. Figure out what's going to pump up economic freedom, and give us a compelling pitch as to how you're going to achieve it. And my organization runs really world-class training programs for this community of think tank leaders and staff. So we tend to know a lot about these partners. And we run conferences on 5 different continents every year where they all network together. So we get a real sense of who the most competent players are in this space, and can have some good back and forth, but again, with a lot of deference to their local knowledge, because they're the ones that are going to be able to determine how to go about making change stick. So through the sort of sophistication that we bring to our grant processes, we figure out who we're going to bet on with the money that donors have entrusted to us to execute this strategy. And we've got a pretty good track record. Some of what's been done is pretty remarkable. In Burundi, one of the poorest countries in the world, our partner there was able to slash the cost of joining the formal economy by 75%. Some of the business registration costs in that process was complex to the point where almost everybody operated as part of the informal black market. That's been changing since these reforms went into place about 18 months ago. In Ukraine, we were able to help farmers regain the ability to sell their land. There'd been a moratorium that essentially undermined the property rights of this large community in Ukraine. Similar property right victories have been achieved now in the Philippines, in Ivory Coast, in South Africa, in India. And then in India, the one I wanted to show you, we were able to get legal protections for street vendors to end the harassment that they were sort of systematically receiving at the hands of corrupt local police forces. And if this works, I'm going to show you a little video that we did so you can get a sense of how these types of reforms make the difference in the lives of actual people. Because this is what I think we need to get much better at telling the story of. So let's see if this...
तो मैं व्यवसाय को अच्छा करने के लिए मैं दिल्ली में आया 40 वर्ष सन 1978 से कांच की चूड़ियों का उत्पादन और विक्रय दोनों ही सरोज नगर बाबू मार्केट में करता हूँ मेरे दिल्ली पुलिस और एनडीएमसी दोनों ही लोग मेरा सामान उठाकर ले जाते थे तब एक अकेला था अब मैं लाखों करोड़ों की आवाज़ हूँ जनप्रतिनिधि हूँ
So street vendors were victims of harassment, were victims of extortion. Municipalities deliberately didn't issue them licenses so that their officials can charge them money, can harass them, can extort, and even the police did the same to them.
जब सामान उठा के ले जाती थी तो नई दिल्ली नगर पालिका परिषद द्वारा जो सामान मेरा जब्त किया जाता था उसको मैं एक प्रार्थना लिखता था कि मेरा सामान इस जगह से सामान उठाया गया है इस तारीख को उठाया गया है उसका ये मैंने इंडेक्स बनाया हुआ है इंडेक्स के जो मैं 1978 में आया उसकी ये पर्ची है, ये नक्शा है मेरा। तो जब ये सामान ले जाते तो जो छुड़ाने के मेरे पास रसीद है, उसका ये सब प्रूफ है मेरे पास। उस समय मुझे बहुत तकलीफ होती थी कि मैं सामान जो लगाता था उसमें से मेरा सामान आधा टूट जाता था, कुछ सामान नुकसान हो जाता, तो मुझे बहुत तकलीफ होती थी।
The amount of bribe that they have to pay, just to give you an example, for the city of Delhi, there are 600,000 street vendors. On average, a street vendor pays about 200 rupees a month bribe to the officers, right? Which is about $4 a month that they pay in a bribe. If you just multiply those two numbers, 600,000 by say $4, it's $2.4 million per month, which is collected from the poorest of the poor in the nation's capital. So we had to fight this battle of legalizing street vendors at the local level. So we ran a campaign in the two cities of India, in Jaipur and Patna, and mobilized the street vendors, mobilized the government machinery to understand the challenges they are facing, work with them to draft a particular kind of a law that will change the status of street entrepreneurs from being completely informal to being somewhat formal in the regulatory system. You can see the example of the benefit of that in terms of the story of Dinesh, who has been working there for more than 40 years, right? Has been always looked down upon by the system, and finally he's now elected to a town vending committee, which is a committee that supervises and regulates the vending space in the city. He's now able to sit across the table from the same officers who used to beat him up and harass him, and be able to challenge them in terms of how they think about the lives of the people like him.
नगर पटरी विक्रय, लेकिन 2014 का जब एक्ट आया है उससे हमें बहुत ज़्यादा बल मिला है, और बल के साथ में समाज का भी भला करने के लिए हमारी सोच बदल गई है। मैं लगातार उसके लिए प्रयास कर रहा हूँ समाज के अच्छे से अच्छा भला करने के लिए, और उसमें मेरे को बहुत हौसला दिया हुआ है।
More than anything else, I think what the act has done for individuals like Dinesh and street vendors across the country has really given them a possibility of steering and being a part of their own governance, and has been immensely empowering.
जूते पहन के सोता हूँ ताकि मेरा पत्रिका का कोई आवाज दे, मुझे 1 मिनट नहीं लगे, मैं तुरंत उसके साथ खड़ा रहता हूँ। अब मैं सोचता हूँ पूरे हिंदुस्तान में जितने पटरी वाले हैं सब मेरे भाई हैं, और सबके लिए मैं काम करूँगा।
So our partner makes the case that, here you have, I think the math works out to, essentially like $4 a month is the average that is stolen from this community in New Delhi, and there's some, I don't know, like 600,000 people that are in these vending markets that have been systematically abused. So he's able to kind of point at these markets and say, that's, I forget the math, but this $2 million a month being taken from the poorest of the poor.
Let me ask you a question, am I ready?
Yeah, let's do that.
Mexico and India, the police are grossly underpaid, okay? The societies there almost understand that the police, they skim to help make a living. But, I mean, isn't that kind of part of it?
That's an interesting question. That may be, but that's another one where I think we'd look to our partners on the ground and say, okay, how do you untangle this situation? Because a lot of moving parts, as you say, and that's part of why we have to come in with a lot of humility about where to make a difference. But the thing that's kind of amazing about this reform that happened is that they were able to pass across India, a Street Vendor Protection Act that makes it that they have a property right to be able to conduct their business without harassment. And then it's, as I understand it, it's not fully implemented across India, but in at least the 3 or 4 major towns, this partners also helped set up these associations. So Dinesh has gone from being the harassed to being the guy that now stands up to protect the rights. So he's, at some point he says, I sleep with my shoes on because, I want to be out there for my brothers and sisters in this community, because now I have the legal authority to say, hey, the police were in this part of the square harassing these people, there's repercussions. And those protections now exist, at least in parts of India. And again, it's kind of slow going. And sometimes I feel like, when we talk to some supporters that kind of want to see, a fall of the Berlin Wall type of momentous achievement, that's not what this is. But I've come to believe that lots of little incremental reforms can be what help unlock other reforms. And in the meantime, as we have gotten a little bit better about telling the stories of actual individuals whose lives are affected, I think that it's an exciting sort of marketing opportunity for us to say, this isn't abstract stuff. This is helping a guy who's been treated unfairly for 40 years. And now he's able to not only conduct his own business, but can help others achieve a better livelihood than he was able to for so long. But so the thing that makes me really excited about this is because these different reforms that have succeeded with investments from my organization of just around $40,000 for these projects that the think tanks on the ground find matching funds within their local donor community, because we don't want to create a system where they're just looking to us. We want them to be sustainable and have local buy-in as well. So we think we've structured that part of it in a smart way. But this is not huge amounts of money when you compare it to the behemoth, which is the foreign aid budgets across the world. The number is that 146 billion is spent by governments on official development aid annually, with the U.S. contributing about 20 to 25% of that amount. And I wouldn't want to go and say that all that is poorly spent. There's probably good things that shouldn't be immediately terminated, but I'm also sure that a lot of it is wasteful, and a lot of it is going through corrupt governments that use it to prop up themselves. When you give money to corrupt governments, it makes them even less connected to the people they're supposed to be serving, allows them to have more resources to dole out in politicized ways to keep their power and serve their own factions that sustain their rule. So I think that it's fair to say that $146 billion is not spent optimally. There's a ton of private philanthropy given by really good-hearted people, and some of those projects I think are kind of wonderful. A lot of them are devoted to establishing schools in poor communities, digging water wells, and that can be transformative. But then sometimes you hear about the wells that aren't maintained because the societies remain poor. The societies remain in conditions where the rules of the game that people operate within don't lead to the kind of more prosperous societies that come through exchange and enterprise. And when you look at how much has been spent on this type of strategy, it's almost zero. So we really think that the exciting message that we get to deliver is that if you care about global poverty, let's at least think about a diversified strategy that pays attention to increasing economic freedom, and in particular, working with those groups on the ground that are aligned with our values, that have the local knowledge to make a difference. To just show you what one final quote that came from a meeting I had many years ago with Sir John Templeton, who became he was the legendary sort of pioneer of mutual funds and international investing, then became a great philanthropist. And the years before his death, he became a supporter of Atlas Network. And when I got to meet with him face to face, I asked him, well, what is it that really inspires your giving towards my organization and the partners that we have around the world? And he put it this way. He said, well, there's a lot of philanthropy that focuses on alleviating the symptoms of current poverty, soup kitchens and the like. Comparatively little is being spent on what surely must be a more cost-effective strategy of preventing future poverty. That's what happens when you make policy reforms that enable enterprise to happen. So it's exciting to me that I think that we're now, thanks to the upgraded capacities of our partners, we're really fulfilling this vision that Sir John had about preventing future poverty. And I think this could be a game changer in bringing more of the philanthropic community to be gathering behind our efforts to expand freedom. And when I go back to that original question I posed, at the end of the day, I don't really care if you're putting your hand up for the moral case for liberty, or just because it works in helping people around the world to have more opportunity and more prosperity. Because I think that just more hands up for helping the partners that we're privileged to work with around the world is the end goal. So I will stop there and see if there's questions and discussion. Thank you.
We're going to take questions in order that I see you raise your hand. Please make them concise, and we'll start right here.
Have you been able to apply your principles for your innovative way of ending poverty or preventing future poverty in urban areas in the United States, or has it been strictly abroad?
Well, it's almost like you're a plant setting this up, and I know you're not. But this is really fun because we're just doing a little bit of a pivot, reaching out to our U.S. partners and sort of inventorying, what's the way to translate the lessons we've learned here to situations that are happening in low-income communities across the U.S. There's a wonderful guy named Mauricio Miller who had an appointment under Clinton and was celebrated by Obama and has a MacArthur Genius Grant on his resume, and he doesn't come from my kind of intellectual tradition, but he's someone that has wound up really right where we are in terms of thinking about how you actually solve poverty. He's a big skeptic about one-size-fits-all strategies, and he'll make the case that too often we think in this really patronizing way and say that it's the job of the government to look at a poor community, identify the problems, and then it's up to us to fix those problems. He thinks about his mom, who would have been viewed by others as, well, she's a single mom who immigrated from Mexico. She had one troubled daughter, but then he said, they never see that she was an amazing seamstress who taught herself accounting, who raised one of her children, got into UC Berkeley, and then went on to do good things. And she sacrificed and worked hard, and there was so much positive that was going on there. But the social service people always saw her as the problem that needed to be fixed. So Mauricio says, we need to go in, we have to listen to the poor communities that are, in the U.S., only 4% of our population in poverty stays there for more than 4 or 5 years. The vast majority are trying to get out, sometimes doing really creative things to get out, and let's listen to them and find out what roadblocks they're facing. So it's been fun to realize this could be an even transpartisan effort, that there's people that, we don't have to necessarily argue about the size of the welfare state and the entitlement state. That's a fun discussion for, libertarian-minded people to have. But maybe we first focus on what are the barriers that governments put in the way that are preventing people from succeeding. And some of our partners that have been working on occupational licensing problems and prisoner reentry into society so that it's easier for them to get gainful employment and reconnect with families. I think that those are nice models that already show that there's a lot of movement in this area, and it's an area that we are looking to expand. So sort of a new frontier for us to pivot and see what we can do in the US as well.
Sometimes people struggle with, when we hear, well, it's local knowledge, we think of local power, instead of asking the real question, who has the best knowledge for this particular problem? A lot of times we just immediately turn toward an existing power structure like the government, like an existing coalition. Yeah,
okay, that's interesting. So let me tell you one story about our partner in the Ivory Coast. because they now have a model for detailing property rights and documenting them that didn't come from the top down, and now it's exciting that the World Bank's sort of following it and seeing if they can replicate it in other countries. But our partner there realized that there's a lot of stored up but inaccessible value in the property that's held in different communities that are in poverty, but there's no way they could leverage what they actually own because they don't have title to it. It could be taken at any time. There's no incentive to improve it. There's no ability to mortgage against it, to get an education or start a business and so on. So there's always been this case for property rights, but the way that they realized that they needed to move forward was not by lobbying the government. They went to like the tribal elders in different communities, the people that actually were turned to adjudicate disputes because the functioning legal system wasn't functioning. And there's these neat pictures of them having these town hall meetings presided over by sort of the tribal elders in the big robes and everything. And it was with them that they sort of came to the agreement and said, okay, as you see it, like this is your community's land, this is who owns which part. And once they had those agreements, they were able to sort of move forward and say, okay, can we all we settle this little dispute proactively, so it's not going to be the source of conflict later. But they were able to sort of map things by, I think you're saying, like working with other sources of authority and then trying to get that either documented into law, or there's some places where they're trying to do this now with blockchain and kind of forget about needing to have it codified as long as there's a registry that people trust. So it's definitely interesting to see how change manifests itself in different ways and in different locations.
You mentioned that you had worked in Ukraine. What was the time frame that you worked in Ukraine? And also, I see reports where the Ukrainian farmers are concerned that outsiders are coming in and buying their land.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's been part of the reason from the beginning, that saying that they're afraid that Russian oligarchs were going to take land. So this has been a contentious debate. It's really just in the past few months that this reform has moved towards approval. And our take is that maybe there's some concerns that are legitimate here, but the way that this has been imposed so that people with very modest holdings are sort of forced into one system where they can only lease their land to others at a government-determined price is inhibiting their own economic freedom and retarding the economic growth of the region. So I guess I don't have a snappy answer, but I think that our partners on the ground think that the fear of that Russians are going to come in and buy up all the farmland is not a legitimate concern, and that the economic liberties of the people involved are really at stake. And this has all happened in the past, I could say, 4 or 5 years. Our partner there first went to the European Court of Human Rights to get a judgment to show that Ukraine had not honored commitments to protect people's property rights in a way that is kind of commonly understood through the region, and that set in motion the legislative change that's now just recently been implemented. There's going to be another really nice video coming up about one of the people that's been a leader on this, a farmer that's been sort of the case that was brought to the European Court of Human Rights. And if you look at the materials there, it's the cover story of our most recent quarterly that we put out. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that.
Closer to home, we're in Middle America. We're all wealthy citizens here. We can afford a $12 lunch. That's wealthy. Some people
Indeed.
make $12 in their lifetime. Some places. But one of the things that I think we need to refocus on, as we come in contact with people who are promoting perhaps the rights of the less wealthy, I think a distinction has to be made in mind, and we're hit with this label of income inequality, and I think to really think properly about that, we need to think of not income inequality but productivity inequality, because number one, we want to help out people that have a burning desire to be productive. But we don't want to help out people who've made it a lifestyle to be couch potatoes their entire life. And so I think we really have to be discerning, when we go to people, and we have to be able to say, which side of the fence are you on? Right. Or do you have a burning desire to be productive, and we'll help you all we can? Or are you going to be a couch potato, or a drug dealer, or a pimp, or whatever, in the neighborhood, so you can drive the big car? So I think we really have to be discerning about who we're helping and how we help them.
Yeah, no, I think it's a smart comment, and I think that the inequality issue is one that certainly resonates here. It's going to be a talking point in political campaigns this year and maybe forever. We certainly see it in different countries around the world where it's used to attack the free enterprise system. There's a rational part of me that wants to just say, it doesn't matter, these statistical measures like the Gini coefficient, about how much room there is between the top and the bottom and some income distribution chart. What matters is, are people in poverty or not? Like, what is the absolute condition of their circumstances? That's what we should be really worried about and trying to lift up. I've come to realize that argument doesn't always land the way I think it should, and that when we tell people, don't worry about inequality, they think we're monsters. So I've been trying to promote and encourage some of our think tank friends to think about this in maybe different terms and say, we care about the inequalities that matter. And that doesn't necessarily mean how rich you are relative to the richest guy you can think of, but it does matter if you can get into a school that is, if your kids can go to school that will help them in life, or if it's just essentially a prison that keeps them in daycare for however many hours a day. The school choice movement, the removing occupational licensing requirements that keep people out of the workforce. These are the kind of little inequalities that I think our side can tackle and show that we care about those in low-income communities, and again want to reward opportunity, give them paths to lift themselves out without the presumption that we're going to do that for them and that they need our help by just giving them things that at the end of the day aren't going to put them on a path for success. That's only going to come if they're productively engaged in the economy.
Okay, India, synonym caste system. It used to be that way, and obviously levels 1 through 5 being the gutter cleaner, and the man was doomed that his kids are going to be that. What is the current status of the caste system? Multi went away, but I mean, that's got to go, otherwise you guys don't have too much of a chance.
Yeah, well, let me recommend one other video you can watch while you're holed up at home. There's a video called India Awakes that we were able to provide some advice to, and it was being put together by friends of ours at an organization called Free to Choose Network, which kind of came out as the guy that originally produced Milton Friedman's Free to Choose PBS series way back when. They now do some wonderful documentaries, and this one called India Awakes has a story like right to this point, and it talks about how the increase in economic freedom in India since 1991 has been again sort of unequally distributed. There's a lot of barriers that are keeping especially poorer communities down, but it has undermined some of the traditional caste system. So there's this great story of a Dalit, the lowest of the low in the caste system, who is now a millionaire, now living in places where Dalits are not supposed to live. And they tell the story of him being hired by some German company that came in, and they were having problems in their construction project, and he said, you need guys? Like, I can get 30 guys here tomorrow to help. And from that, he came up with his own company, built it up, and it's I think one of the great stories of how economic freedom can have this broader effect that goes to just like the dignity of human beings. Not everything's measured on a chart, but it's about weakening systems of caste and other sorts of arbitrary privileges that have been embedded in societies for a long time. So it's a real fun story to view. So India Awakes is the name of that one if you want to catch it later.
Right here. Hi, I'm Kathleen. Tell me your name again. Brad. Thank you so much for doing this. This is awesome. I can't imagine how much help this is to countless people in these societies. A long time ago, I saw, this is probably 20, 30 years ago, I saw where they were taking a gentleman that wanted to open some kind of small business, taking through the steps of all of the things he had to do for regulations in the country. I can't tell you where it was, but it impacted me then. I was like, well, no wonder they can't get ahead, even when they want to. But I have a friend that works for John Deere. He's worked there for many years, going to retire soon. And he was sent over to Russia to sell them equipment. And he came back and told me just exactly what you're saying. He's like, you don't understand. They have thousands of acres on, supposedly one farmer owns, but yet there's hundreds of leases that are affected by that. So the nightmare of the property rights and how to get all that formulated is a huge problem in selling it. And they can't go to the bank and get financing for the equipment because they don't really own it all. They don't own all the land that they're going to show to make the income off of. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. And my main question is, how do you get the governments to cooperate? Are you using diplomats? I don't understand. And your ideas are great, but how do you get these governments?
The great thing about our model is that I'm not the guy that's going to have the answer. So I don't need to pretend to be an expert on every government of the world and how you're going to get change to happen. The whole model that we have is to work with local think tanks, kind of similar to what you have here with Kansas Policy Institute locally, and you might hear on the radio about Cato Institute and Heritage Foundation and other think tanks that focus on popularizing economic reforms that I think most people in this room would agree with. We find those people all around the world. We invite them into our training programs. We get to know them through that, and then we raise funds among generous people that say, I want to help in this country, I want to help on this topic, but you guys know the partners. So we are really careful stewards of those dollars that our donors entrust us with and try to put them to use with partners that really have the local knowledge. So when we're reviewing grant proposals and then doing talks with the grantees, those are the types of questions that we're going to be trying to tease out. Like, what's the actual path to change? What are not just the outputs you're going to give us, which might be, seminars and papers and publicity campaign, but how's this going to land? What are you trying to achieve with which decision makers? So that's something that gladly I don't have to know for each country we work in.
Back here.
Yeah.
I'd like to put this in a kind of a domestic and international context. There are elected officials running for office who talk about how the socialism that they support is the Scandinavian variety, not the Cuban, not the Venezuelan, not the North Korean variety.
Right.
Would you take a minute to kind of give us an idea of how socialist is Scandinavia at this point compared to whichever country, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, or Finland, compared to the United States? And does that argument, they will say, well, they all have government-run healthcare programs, and so we need to have the government take over the health system.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a really interesting question, and I'll keep giving you movies to watch because I know you're going to be hunkered down. So there's another one that's by the same organization, Free to Choose Network, with one of our friends, Johan Norberg, where he goes through the Swedish model and talks about how Sweden had an experiment with hardcore socialism, from like 1970 or so until like 1992, when it was wreaking havoc. So if you actually look at Sweden's score and other Scandinavian countries' score in areas of economic freedom, you see that there is that there's no minimum wage in Sweden. There is, they've made these changes that are really unique in Europe to have a flexible labor market. There are clear property rights. They do have big welfare states, and that, I guess, allows Bernie Sanders to say, we need to follow that model. But the guy in this film about Sweden that came out by Free to Choose Network was in the papers the other day, just saying, okay, if you're going to follow the Swedish model, you need to do X, Y, and Z that would take you in a much more sort of traditional conservative direction than Trump has ever advocated for. So I think that it's an interesting point of reference, because certainly they're projecting onto Sweden, things that I don't think are true anymore.
Another question that came up. What is your opinion of the United States Agency for International Development? They're the big kahuna in terms of economics. They got $7 billion to start Power Africa. How do you work with them? What are your thoughts about them?
Yeah, so we don't work with them. Atlas Network is entirely privately funded, and it's sort of outside of our scope to be lobbying for change. Atlas isn't a think tank itself; it's a service organization. So speaking personally, I've got a lot of skepticism about a lot of what USAID funds. I do think that there is an increasing number of people that are sort of friendly to our ideas, who are in bureaucracies there and maybe trying to make some reforms that would be positive. And I think it's probably unrealistic for us to put on our near-term libertarian wish list to get rid of it entirely. So I think that maybe there's a more positive direction that it's headed in. But our model really is to prove that this kind of approach to addressing poverty through systematic policy change from the bottom up, we want to prove that's a scalable model. And in the near term, we realize that government agencies aren't going to suddenly snap to a totally different conclusion about what's most valuable, and the Gates Foundation isn't going to turn around right away and say, what's Atlas Network doing here? But we think that if we keep showing that we can replicate this with partners around the world, and we come up with a critical mass of success stories as they accumulate on this povertyandfreedom.org website that I'll invite you to visit, I think we can change things that way. But we don't have any position towards the USAID.
I wanted to, I failed earlier to mention that the Brad Lips is here today, courtesy of the Wichita Pachyderm Society. And to any Wichita Pachyderm Society people here, I want to thank you for bringing Mr. Lips into town and sharing this wonderful resource. Let's give the Pachyderm Society.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Are you familiar with hockey stick of human prosperity?
Yeah.
Recognizing how wealthy we really are.
Yeah.
And are we doing anything to promote that concept?
Yeah, I mean, one of the exciting things I think is that poverty is on the decline. So sometimes when if we put up a slide that says a new strategy for defeating poverty for good, I think that the trajectory shows that there may not be $1 a day poverty if we just keep the trend lines as they are right now. That might go away in 20, 25 years. But I think there's things we can do to accelerate that, and things that we can do to make sure that the kind of uplift we've seen in some parts of what had been the developing world has become much more prosperous over the decades we've lived through. That can be extended to other countries as well. But it is one of those things that you have to back up and say, because it happens slowly, we don't always think about it. But the escape of more than 1 billion people in Asia from the worst kind of dire poverty over the past 20 to 25 years, that may be the story of the era we've lived through. It's like unprecedented in human history, and we should be real thoughtful about what created that, because India and China were not big recipients of foreign aid. It's a lot of the African countries that have not improved their situation that have been the ones receiving most of that largesse. So I think that that the reason that we've seen this big escape from poverty of so many people is really about trade and enterprise.
Mr. Brad Lips of the
Okay.
Atlas Network.
Thanks.
Thank you.